That Tuesday night, I was standing in my kitchen with a warm cup of chamomile tea against my lips when my 10-year-old grandson suddenly grabbed my sleeve and whispered, "Grandma, please don't drink that." I almost laughed at him. I thought he was being dramatic. But then I looked into his eyes. He wasn't joking. He was terrified. And when he quietly told me what he had seen his mother doing in my kitchen 3 mornings earlier, my hands began to shake so badly that I nearly dropped the cup. Because suddenly all those mornings when I had woken up dizzy, all those afternoons when I could barely remember what I had done, all those nights when I felt strangely weak inside my own home, came rushing back to me. I had blamed my age. I had blamed my medication. I had blamed myself. I never imagined the person I trusted enough to call daughter had been secretly putting something into the very honey I used every night. And the worst part? My grandson had seen it happen. He had kept the secret inside his little heart for 3 days because he was afraid no one would believe him. That night, one whisper saved my life. But when I finally discovered what was inside that honey jar, why it had been put there, and what my own son knew about it, I realized the poison in my kitchen was only the beginning. What I uncovered next changed everything I believed about my family. And even now, at 73 years old, there is one question I still ask myself before I fall asleep. What would have happened to me if my grandson had stayed silent? Before I tell you what happened in my own kitchen on a Tuesday morning that started like every other morning of my life, I want to know a little about you. So while you listen to this, drop a comment and tell me your name and which city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one of them, and it means more to me than, sitting here at 73 years old, telling you the truest story I have ever told anyone. And if you have a grandmother of your own, if she raised you, fed you, prayed for you when you didn't even know it, then do something for me right now before you go any further. Hit that like button for her. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what I have to say next. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there tonight, there is another grandmother sitting alone in a kitchen, trusting the wrong person the way I almost did. My name is Barbara Holcomb. I am 73 years old. And until 11 months ago, I believed with my whole heart the worst thing that could ever happen to an old woman was being forgotten. I did not know yet that there was something far worse than being forgotten. There was being remembered for exactly the wrong reasons, by exactly the wrong people, for exactly the wrong purpose. I live in a 2-story house on Millbrook Lane. The same house my husband Walter and I bought 44 years ago, when the street was nothing but dirt and half-built frames and a promise from a young developer that someday it would be a real neighborhood. Walter's been gone 6 years now. Heart attack sudden on a Sunday in the garage. Wrench still in his hand because he could never leave a leaking faucet alone. Even on the day the good Lord decided it was his time. I still keep that wrench in the drawer by the door. I am not sentimental about much, but I am sentimental about that. We had one son, Craig Holcomb, 46 years old now, married to a woman named Rachel for the last 12 years. And then there's my grandson, Jacob, 10 years old, the only truly pure thing left in my life. The boy with his grandfather's eyes and his grandfather's stubborn chin and way of looking at you like he already knows more than he's letting on. Jacob stays with me too, sometimes 3 nights a week, ever since Rachel started her new job managing a boutique fitness studio downtown, and Craig took on more hours at the dealership where he sells trucks to men who remind him, I think, of the father he never quite measured up to. I tell you all of this not because it matters who is related to whom, but because I need you to understand something before the real story begins. I loved my son. I loved him the way only a mother who buried his father alone can love the one piece of Walter that still walks around on this earth. And I trusted my daughter-in-law, Rachel, more than I trusted almost anyone. Because for years she was kind to me. She brought me soup when I had the flu 2 winters ago. She sat with me at the hospital when I had my hip replaced. She called me Mom, not Barbara, not Mrs. Holcomb. Mom, and I let myself believe that meant something. I tell you this because trust is the door. And once someone is inside that door, they can do things to you that a stranger never could. It was a Tuesday evening in early spring. Jacob was staying the night because Craig and Rachel had what they called a business dinner. Though I would learn later that very little about that dinner had anything to do with business. I had made my usual evening tea, chamomile with a spoon of honey, the same tea I have made myself every single night for the last 30 years, ever since my doctor told me it would help with the arthritis in my hands, and, more than that, help me sleep through nights that had grown longer and quieter since Walter passed. Jacob was sitting at the kitchen table doing multiplication homework, his tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth the way it does when he concentrates. And I was standing at the counter stirring honey into my mug, half listening to the television murmuring in the other room, half thinking about nothing at all, the way you do when you're 73 and every evening starts to look like every other evening. I brought the mug to my lips, and that is when I heard it. Not a shout, not even a normal boy-sized voice, a whisper. So quiet I almost mistook it for the wind against the window. Jacob had gotten up from the table without me noticing, and he was standing right beside me, tugging at my sleeve, his small face pale in a way I'd never seen on him before. "Grandma," he whispered, "don't drink that." I laughed at first. I actually laughed because what grandmother wouldn't? Hearing her 10-year-old grandson whisper something so dramatic about a cup of chamomile tea. I told him, "Sweetheart, it's just my nightly tea. The same tea I've had my whole life, nothing to worry about." But Jacob did not laugh with me. He did not even smile. He looked at the mug like it was something alive, something that might bite. And he said it again, slower this time, like he was choosing every word with a care no 10-year-old should have to use. "Grandma, please, I saw something." There was something in his voice that stopped my hand halfway to my mouth. Call it instinct. Call it the same thing that makes the hair on the back of your neck rise before you even understand why. I set the mug down on the counter, untouched, and I crouched down to his level, the way I used to when he skinned his knee or had a bad dream, and I asked him, as gently as I could, what he saw. He glanced toward the front window, toward the driveway, as if he was afraid someone might be standing right outside listening. And then he told me 3 days earlier, when his parents had dropped him off for what they called a quick visit before dinner, he had come into my kitchen early, before I was even awake, to get himself a glass of water. And he had seen his mother, Rachel, standing at my counter near the small ceramic canister where I keep my loose honey packets and my box of chamomile tea bags. She had a small bottle in her hand, he said, clear, like the kind cough syrup comes in. But he had never seen that bottle in our house before, and she'd been pouring something from it, slowly, carefully, into the honey jar, stirring it in with the little wooden spoon I keep beside it. Jacob said he had frozen in the doorway, too confused to understand what he was looking at, and Rachel had turned, seen him standing there, and for just a second, he said, her face had done something strange. Not surprised exactly. Caught, like a person caught doing something they had rehearsed doing quietly many times before. And then she had smiled at him, quick and easy, the way adults smile at children to make a moment disappear. And she said, just adding a little something special to Grandma's honey. Don't tell her. It's a surprise. And she had ruffled his hair and sent him back to bed. A 10-year-old boy does not always know what he's looking at, but a 10-year-old boy who loves his grandmother knows. Deep in his gut, when something feels wrong, even if he cannot explain why. And for 3 days, Jacob told me, he had carried that secret around like a stone in his pocket, telling himself it was nothing, that his mother would never hurt Grandma, that he must have misunderstood. But tonight, watching me lift that mug to my lips with honey stirred into it from that very same jar, something in him had broken open, and the whisper had come out before he could stop it. I want you to understand something about that moment, because it is the moment that split my life into a before and an after. I did not scream. I did not cry. Something in me, some old, quiet, iron part of myself that I did not know I still had at 73 years old, simply went still and cold and sharp, the way water goes still right before it turns to ice. I looked at that mug of tea sitting on my counter, tea sweetened with honey from a jar my own daughter-in-law had apparently been tampering with for who knows how many nights before this one. And I thought about every strange, foggy morning I had had over the past several weeks. The dizziness I had blamed on my blood pressure medication. The confusion I had blamed on my age. The nights I had gone to bed at 9 and woken up at noon feeling like I had been dragged through a river. I had mentioned it to my doctor almost in passing. An old woman's complaint, nothing urgent. He had adjusted one of my prescriptions and sent me on my way. I looked at my grandson standing there in his pajamas with the dinosaurs on them. His eyes wide and frightened. More frightened, I realized, of losing me than of anything else in the world. And I made a decision, right? Then that would carry me through. The next several months of my life, I was not going to scream. I was not going to confront anyone. I was not going to call Craig that night and demand an explanation, because if I did, Rachel would simply deny it. Blame it on a confused little boy's imagination. And by morning, that honey jar would be gone, rinsed out, replaced, and I would have nothing but a whisper and my own suspicion to stand on. I was going to find out exactly what was in that jar and exactly why I told Jacob he had done the bravest thing a little boy could ever do for his grandmother. And I meant it with everything in me. I told him not to say another word about it to his mother or his father. Not one word, not even a hint, because I needed him to trust me the way I now needed to trust myself. I poured the tea down the sink. I did not touch the honey jar with my bare hands. I remembered enough from the crime shows Walter used to watch on Sunday afternoons to know that if this was what I feared, I needed to be careful, methodical, quiet. I found an old pair of rubber gloves under the sink, the ones I use for cleaning the bathroom tile. And with my grandson watching me with those wide, serious eyes, I carefully sealed that honey jar inside a plastic bag and hid it at the very back of my linen closet behind the spare blankets Walter and I bought on our 30th anniversary trip to Maine. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in my bed with Jacob curled up beside me, the way he sometimes does when he is scared, his small back rising and falling against my side. And I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about every version of Rachel I had ever known. The Rachel who brought me soup. The Rachel who held my hand in the hospital waiting room. The Rachel who called me Mom. And I thought about a different Rachel. One I was only beginning to see the outline of, standing in my kitchen before dawn with a small clear bottle, pouring something into my honey, with the patience of a woman who has done this before and intends to do it again. I am going to tell you everything that happened after that night, every step of it, because I think somewhere in this story is something you need to hear. Whether you are 73 like me or 17 or 40, and just starting to notice things about the people are closest to you that don't quite add up. But before I go further, I need you to do that thing I asked at the very beginning. Comment your name and your city, so I know who is sitting with me tonight while I tell this. And if any part of your heart still aches for a grandmother of your own, hit that like button right now, because where this story goes, I promise you. It is going to test every soft place left in mine. The next morning, I did something I had never done in my entire life. I lied to my son. Craig called around 9 to ask how Jacob's night had gone. Casual, the way he always does, half his attention already on something else. I told him everything was wonderful, that Jacob had slept like an angel, that I was thinking about keeping him an extra day since I was feeling a little tired and could use the company. Craig, bless him, never suspected a thing. He said that sounded fine, that Rachel had a full schedule at the studio anyway, and he would swing by Thursday to pick Jacob up. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for a long moment, feeling the strange, sick weight of having just lied to protect myself from my own family. That same morning, I drove to the pharmacy on the other side of town, not the one near my house, where the pharmacist, a kind man named Louis, has known me for 15 years and would have asked 100 questions. I was not ready to answer. I drove 25 minutes to a pharmacy I had never set foot in before, and I asked to speak to whoever might be able to help me identify a substance. The pharmacist there, a younger woman with kind eyes, told me gently that they could not test unknown liquids for legal and safety reasons. But she gave me the name of an independent lab across town that did private toxicology testing, the kind used sometimes in custody disputes or workplace investigations. She wrote the address on a sticky note and told me to be careful. I drove straight there, with that honey jar sealed in its plastic bag on the passenger seat like a bomb. I was trying not to jostle. The lab was a small, unremarkable office above a dry cleaner, run by a retired forensic technician named Arthur Bell, who had left the police department 8 years earlier to start his own private testing service. I told him I needed to know, quietly and quickly, exactly what had been added to a jar of honey. He did not ask me why. Men who have spent 30 years in forensics learn not to ask why until the results come back. He told me it would take 3 to 5 business days. Those 5 days were the longest of my life. Longer even than the days after Walter died. Because grief, at least, is a wound, the shape of. This was something else. This was living inside my own home. Letting my son believe everything was normal. Letting my daughter-in-law hug me at the door when she came to pick up Jacob on Thursday. Feeling her arms around me and thinking the whole time, I'm at that little clear bottle and that small wooden spoon. I want to tell you something about those 5 days because I think it is important. I did not spend them plotting revenge. Not yet. I spent those first hours simply trying to survive the ordinary business of being a grandmother while my mind kept slipping sideways into panic. I remember standing at my kitchen sink on the second morning, washing a single coffee cup, and my hands started shaking so badly that the cup slipped and cracked against the basin, and I stood there staring at the broken piece of porcelain for what felt like a very long time before. I understood that I was crying, quietly, without even realizing I had started. I called in sick to my Tuesday volunteer shift at the church food pantry, something I have done every week for 11 years without missing more than a handful of times. Because I did not trust my own face not to give something away to the women I have known for over a decade. I sat in my house instead, curtains half drawn, watching the street outside like I expected something to come walking up the driveway, though I could not have told you what. Fear, I learned that week, does not always look like screaming. Sometimes it looks like an old woman sitting very still in her own living room, afraid to eat anything she did not personally watch being prepared, afraid to drink water from her own tap without running it a long time first, afraid of her own kitchen, the room that had been the warm center of my whole life for over 4 decades. I spent those 5 days watching quietly, the way I imagine a doctor watches a patient before deciding on a diagnosis. I started paying closer attention to things I had let slide past me for months. The way Rachel had been asking more and more often lately about my will, always disguised as concern, always wrapped in a soft voice. Mom, have you thought about updating your paperwork? Just in case, you never know at your age, the way Craig had mentioned twice in the last 2 months that the dealership was struggling, that they had taken out a second loan on their house, that Rachel's studio was bleeding money every quarter, despite what she posted on her social media. The way 6 weeks earlier, Rachel had brought up almost too casually over Sunday dinner that she had heard about a wonderful long-term care facility not far from here. Just something to think about for the future. Mom, not now, but someday, I began to understand slowly, painfully, the shape of what might be happening. I was 73 years old. I owned my house outright, paid off the year before Walter died. I had his life insurance invested conservatively, but, well, sitting untouched for 6 years because I never needed to touch it. I had my own retirement savings from 31 years of teaching second grade at Lincoln Elementary. On paper, to someone drowning in debt, I was not just a mother-in-law. I was a solution. I remember the exact moment that thought finished forming in my mind, because I was standing at my bedroom window looking down at my own driveway, and I felt something inside my chest that I can only describe as a kind of quiet collapse. The sound a house makes settling on its foundation. Not loud, not dramatic, just a deep structural shift you feel more than hear. I had spent 46 years believing that whatever else went wrong in my life, my son would never, under any circumstances, let harm come to me. That belief had been load-bearing. It had held up everything else. And in that single moment at the window, I understood that it might not be true anymore, and I did not yet know how to stand upright without it. I did something that day I am almost embarrassed to tell you. I went into Craig's old bedroom, the one I have kept mostly the same since he moved out at 22. Football trophies still on the shelf, a faded poster still tacked crooked on the wall. And I sat down on the edge of that narrow bed and I looked through an old photo album I keep in the closet. Craig, at 6 years old, missing his front teeth. Craig, at 10, the same age Jacob is now, holding up a fish he had caught with Walter at the lake, grinning so wide you could see clear to the back of his mouth. I sat there for over an hour turning those pages, trying to find the boy I remembered inside the man I now had to consider dangerous. And by the time I closed that album, I understood something that changed the entire shape of what I did next. Whatever Craig had allowed himself to become, whatever fear or desperation or weakness, had opened the door for Rachel to do what she was doing. Some part of that boy in the photographs was still in there. I did not yet know if that mattered, but I decided it would matter to how I chose to respond. On the 4th day, I called Melissa. Melissa Draper has lived across the street from me for 22 years. She's 68 years old, a retired paralegal, sharp as a tack, and the closest thing I have had to a sister. Since my own sister passed in 2009, Melissa had watched Walter and me raise Craig. She had sat with me through the funeral, through the year after, through every ordinary Tuesday when the loneliness got loud. If there was one person on this earth I trusted with my life, it was Melissa Draper. I sat in her kitchen, the mirror image of mine across the street, and I told her everything, the whisper, the bottle, the honey jar sitting in a lab across town waiting to tell me the truth. Melissa did not gasp or clutch her chest the way I half expected. She got very quiet. The way she used to get, she told me once, right before she caught something important in a legal document that everyone else had missed. And then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Barbara, if this is what you think it is, you are not going to fight this with anger. You're going to fight this with evidence. Anger gets old women dismissed. Evidence gets people arrested. Melissa had spent 30 years working for a family law attorney downtown before she retired, and she still knew the man well. A sharp, quiet attorney named Harold Voss, who had handled 2 elder abuse cases in the past decade that had gone all the way to criminal court. She called him that same afternoon, and by Friday, I was sitting in his office, laying out everything I knew, everything I suspected, while he took notes in a small leather book and asked me questions I had not even thought to ask myself. He told me something that stuck with me through everything that came after. He said that in his experience, financial elder abuse rarely announces itself with a single dramatic act. It creeps in slowly, disguised as concern, as help, as love, until one day the person on the other end of it wakes up and realizes they have been quietly, methodically drained, both of money and of the strength to fight back. He said the honey jar, if it turned out to be what I feared, was not likely to be an isolated incident. It was likely to be one small piece of something larger, something that had probably already begun shaping documents, conversations, plans I had not yet been told about. Harold Voss was not a warm man in the way some people expect their lawyer to be. He did not pat my hand or tell me everything would be fine. He was precise, almost clinical, and I came to be deeply grateful for that in the weeks that followed, because I did not need comfort in that office. I needed a plan. He asked me question after question, writing everything down in that small leather notebook, and somewhere around the 40th question, he set his pen down and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses and said something I have carried with me ever since. He said, "Mrs. Holcomb, in my experience, the families who get away with this for years are the ones where the victim decides it is easier to doubt herself than to doubt the people she loves. You have already done the hardest part. You believed your own eyes. I did not realize until he said it out loud how badly I needed someone to say that to me. For 5 days I had been quietly, secretly wondering if I was a foolish old woman building a conspiracy out of a boy's misunderstanding and a jar of honey. Hearing a stranger with 30 years of experience validate what I already knew in my bones gave me a kind of strength I had not felt since before Walter passed. That evening, back in my own kitchen, I stood at the counter for a long while, looking at the replacement honey jar I'd already purchased that afternoon. Plain, ordinary, unopened. And I thought about all the small, ordinary moments of my life that this had already stolen from me. The simple pleasure of a cup of tea before bed, the comfort of my own home, the unquestioned love I had felt for the woman my son married. Grief, I was learning, does not only come from death. Sometimes it comes from watching something you believed was solid ground reveal itself to have been thin ice all along. He was right. On the following Monday, 5 days after I dropped off that honey jar, Arthur Bell called me with the results. The clear liquid Rachel had poured into my honey jar was a combination of 2 substances. One was a mild but not insignificant dose of a common over-the-counter sedative, the kind that in small amounts causes drowsiness and confusion, especially in someone my age already taking blood pressure medication. The other, more troubling, was a diuretic, the kind that in repeated small doses over weeks or months in an elderly person can cause dangerous drops in blood pressure, dizziness, falls, and in the worst cases, kidney strains severe enough to become life-threatening, especially layered on top of existing medication. Arthur told me in his flat, careful, professional voice that whoever had done this had almost certainly researched exactly what dosage would stay under the radar of a routine doctor's visit, exactly what would look on paper like the ordinary decline of an aging woman. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside that little lab above the dry cleaner, and I did not cry. I want to tell you I cried because it would make for a softer story, but the truth is I felt something colder settle into my chest, something I had not felt since I was a young mother watching a man raise his hand near my son and understanding in an instant exactly what I was capable of to protect what was mine. Except this time it was me who needed protecting. And the person doing the harming was wearing the face of someone who called me mom. I drove home. I sat in my kitchen, in the same chair where Jacob had done his multiplication homework. The night this all began, and I let myself feel, just for a few minutes, everything I had been holding back. The grief of it. Not just fear for my own body, but grief. Real grief. For the years I had spent loving Rachel like a daughter. For every soup she had brought me, every hand she had held. All of it now curdled into something I had to examine for hidden motive. I grieved the version of my family I thought I had. And then I stood up, washed my face. And I called Harold Voss back and told him I was ready to do this the right way. Over the following 6 weeks, I lived a kind of double life I never imagined I would need at 73 years old. To Craig and Rachel, I was exactly the same Barbara Holcomb I had always been. I invited them to Sunday dinners. I drank tea in front of them, always from a mug I had prepared myself, out of their sight. Using tea bags and honey I now kept locked in a small box in my bedroom closet, the honey jar on the counter, replaced with an identical-looking jar filled with plain, untouched honey I bought myself and never let out of my sight. I hugged Rachel at the door the way I always had. I let her ask her gentle, probing questions about my paperwork, my health, my plans, and I answered them vaguely, sweetly. The confused old woman she seemed to want me to be while inside. Every word she said was being filed away as evidence. At Harold's advice, I installed a small, legal, clearly disclosed home security system. Cameras in the kitchen and the front hallway. Telling anyone who asked that, I had read about a rash of break-ins in the next neighborhood over and wanted peace of mind at my age. Nobody questioned it. Old women are allowed to be a little paranoid. The world assumes it and moves past it without a second thought. What the world did not know was that those cameras were feeding footage directly to a secure account. Harold's office monitored footage that, over the following weeks, captured exactly what I needed it to capture. It captured Rachel on 2 separate occasions when she thought I was napping upstairs, going through the drawer in my kitchen where I keep old bills and paperwork, photographing documents with her phone. It captured a phone call she made from my back porch, thinking she was out of range of anything, in which she told someone. We later learned it was a real estate agent, that things were moving along and she thought within the year, maybe less, we could be looking at the house too. Not just the accounts it captured, most damning of all, a conversation between Craig and Rachel in my own living room, 3 weeks into this. Jacob asleep upstairs, in which Craig, voice low and uneasy, asked Rachel if she thought we were pushing too hard, too fast, and Rachel, without a flicker of hesitation, answered that his mother was old and confused and going to leave this world eventually anyway, and it was better for everyone, including Jacob's future, if we made sure things were arranged the right way before some stranger in a nursing home ended up with what should be ours. I watched that footage alone in my bedroom at 11 o'clock at night. And I will tell you honestly, something in me broke that night that has never fully healed. And something else was born in its place that has never fully gone away either. Because in that moment, I heard my own son, my Craig, the boy I nursed through chickenpox and taught to ride a bike on this very street, agree with her. Not enthusiastically, not cruelly, but he agreed, tired and quiet, the way a man agrees to something he does not have the strength left to fight. That was the night I stopped thinking of this as protecting myself and started thinking of it as something else entirely. I'm going to pause here because I think you deserve to know, before I tell you what I did next, that this is not a story about a sweet old grandmother who forgave everything and let it go, because that is what grandmothers are supposed to do. This is a story about a woman who loved her family enough to almost let them kill her slowly, and who had to relearn at 73 years old that love without boundaries is not love at all. It is just a door left open for anyone who wants to walk through it and take what they please. If you are still with me, if any part of this is reminding you of someone in your own life, comment your city below right now and tell me you're listening. Because what happened next in my house on a Sunday evening in early summer is something I have never told another living soul outside of Melissa Harold and the two detectives who eventually sat in my kitchen taking notes. For the next 3 weeks, Harold and I built what he called a complete picture. We gathered the lab report on the honey. We gathered the security footage, time-stamped and verified. We gathered bank records, which Harold was able to subpoena once we filed a formal report. Records that showed Craig and Rachel had, over the previous 8 months, taken out over $60,000 in loans against their home and a business credit line for Rachel's studio that was 3 months behind on payments. We found, buried in Rachel's browser history on a shared family laptop she had once let Jacob use for a school project and forgotten to clear. Searches that made my blood run cold. Searches about elderly medication interactions. Searches about how quickly kidney function can decline in patients over 70. Searches about how long it typically takes to become the legal guardian of a parent deemed no longer competent to manage their own affairs. Harold told me gently but plainly that what we had assembled was enough, more than enough to take to the police, and that given the severity, given that this involved the deliberate, sustained poisoning of an elderly person, this was not a civil matter anymore. This was criminal. He asked me how I wanted to proceed. I thought about it for 2 days. Part of me wanted to call the police that very night and let Craig and Rachel be arrested at their own front door in front of the neighbors, the way I imagined I had been, slowly, quietly poised in the privacy of my own kitchen. Part of me wanted to feel that particular sharp satisfaction of watching someone who had hurt me finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. I will not pretend to you that I did not want that. I am not a saint. I am a 73-year-old woman who almost lost her kidneys and her mind to two people who were supposed to love her. But there was Jacob, who had whispered 4 words that saved my life. Jacob, who was going to have to live with whatever happened to his parents for the rest of his childhood, who did not choose any of this, who loved his mother despite everything, the way children do, unconditionally, painfully, because they do not yet know how to do anything else. Whatever I did next, I had to do it in a way that protected him, that let him keep as much of his innocence as I possibly could, even while I made absolutely certain his parents faced the consequences of what they had done. So I decided to do it my way. I asked Harold to arrange for 2 detectives from the elder abuse unit to be present, quietly in an unmarked car down the street. On the evening I chose, I planned a Sunday dinner, the kind we had every few weeks. Nothing unusual, roast chicken, the good tablecloth, Jacob's favorite lemon cake for dessert. I invited Craig and Rachel as I always did. I did not invite Melissa because I needed her. Instead, sitting quietly in her own living room across the street with a direct line to those detectives, ready to call them in the moment I gave a signal. I spent that Sunday morning at church, something I do most weeks, and I sat in my pew and I prayed honestly and completely for the strength to do what I was about to do without losing myself in the process. I did not pray for forgiveness for what I was about to do. because I did not yet believe I needed it. I prayed for clarity. Craig and Rachel arrived at 5:30 with Jacob, who ran straight to me the moment he walked through the door, wrapping his arms around my waist the way he always does, and I held him a little longer than usual, breathing in the smell of his shampoo, feeling a small heartbeat against me, thinking this is why, this exact feeling right here is why I'm doing this the way I'm doing it and not some other way. I want to describe that dinner in more detail than perhaps I need to, because I have thought about every single minute of it so many times since that it feels etched into me the way certain memories do, more vivid somehow than things that happened yesterday. I had set the table with Walter's mother's china, the good set I usually only bring out for Christmas and Easter, and I remember Rachel noticing it when she walked in, remarking on how lovely everything looked, how special this dinner felt. I remember thinking, standing there with a serving spoon in my hand, how strange and almost cruel it was that she was right about it being special without ever knowing the real reason why. Dinner was ordinary, almost unbearably ordinary. Rachel complimented my chicken. Craig talked about a truck he had sold that week to a young father buying his first vehicle for a growing family. And there was something in the way he told the story, something soft and proud, that reminded me, painfully, of the boy he used to be before whatever had happened to him. Whatever debts and fears and desperation had slowly eaten away at the man I raised. I let myself feel that too, that night. Grief does not wait politely for revenge to finish its business. After dessert, when Jacob had gone upstairs to play a video game in the guest room, the same room he sleeps in most nights, he stays with me. I asked Craig and Rachel to sit with me in the living room for a moment. I told them there was something I needed to discuss about my will and my accounts, something I had been thinking about for weeks, and I watched very carefully. The exact moment Rachel's posture shifted, the way a person leans forward almost imperceptibly when they hear the words they have been waiting to hear. I told them I had been giving a great deal of thought to what happens to everything Walter and I built, especially with Jacob's future in mind, and that I wanted to be transparent with them about some changes I was considering. I watched Rachel's eyes flick toward Craig, quick and bright, and I watched Craig's shoulders relax slightly, the posture of a man hoping, against everything he knew was wrong, that maybe this would solve his problems without him having to do anything more. And then I set a folder down on the coffee table between us. Inside that folder was the lab report from Arthur Bell, the substance analysis of the honey jar, dated and signed. Beneath it, still images pulled from the security footage, time-stamped, showing Rachel at my kitchen counter with this small clear bottle in her hand. Beneath that, a transcript of the conversation the cameras had captured between the two of them in my own living room. The words old and confused and going to leave this world eventually anyway, printed in plain black text where neither of them could pretend they had not said it. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand that because I think it matters. 73 years old, sitting in the living room my husband and I had shared for 44 years. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply looked at my son and my daughter-in-law and I said, quietly, I know what you put in, my honey. I know what you've been doing to me for months. And I know exactly what you said about me in this room 3 weeks ago, thinking I would never hear it. For a moment, nobody in that room moved at all. The clock on the mantel, the one Walter's father gave us as a wedding gift, kept ticking the way it has ticked through 44 years of this. House's joys and sorrows. And it was the only sound in the room. I watched Rachel's eyes move down to that folder and then slowly back up to my face. And I watched her searching my expression for some sign that this was a bluff, some crack in an old woman's resolve. She could talk her way through the way she had talked, her way through so many things before. She did not find one. I made certain of that. I had spent 5 weeks preparing my own face for this exact moment, and I did not let it slip. I have never in my entire life watched color drain from a human face the way it drained from Rachel's in that moment. Craig went very still, the way an animal goes still when it senses a predator has already seen it and there is nowhere left to run. Rachel started to speak, started to reach for some explanation, something about supplements, about a misunderstanding, but I held up my hand, and something in my face must have stopped her cold because she went silent. I told them that everything in that folder, along with several other documents Harold Voss had prepared, was already in the hands of the County Elder Abuse Unit. I told them that 2 detectives were, at that moment, parked down the street, waiting for a phone call from a woman standing at her window across the street. I watched Rachel's face crumble, not with remorse, not yet, but with the particular horror of a person, realizing the trap they built for someone else had closed around their own hands instead. Rachel tried twice more to speak, her voice breaking apart into fragments that did not connect into full sentences. Something about stress, about how hard things had been at the studio, about how she never meant for it to go as far as it did, and I let her talk. Because Harold had told me once that people reveal more of the truth in their panic than they ever do in their composure. And every word she said in that unraveling moment was another thread I filed away, quietly in the back of my mind. Alongside everything else, Craig said my name just once. Mom, in a voice so small and broken it nearly undid every ounce of resolve I had built over the past 6 weeks. And I looked at him, my only son, and I said the hardest true thing I have ever said to another human being. I told him that I had loved him every single day of his life, that I would love him until the day I died, and that loving him was exactly why I was not going to pretend this had not happened. Because a mother who lets her son destroy her to keep the peace is not teaching him love. She's teaching him that there are no consequences for the people he is supposed to protect. I did not call the detectives that night. I know that surprises you. It surprised Harold too when I told him my decision the next morning, but I want to explain why, because I think it matters more than anything else in this story. I told Craig and Rachel that they had 1 week to leave my house that night and go home, to sit with what they had done, and to come back to me together with a plan, not an excuse, not an apology dressed up in tears designed to manipulate an old woman one more time. A real plan. Rachel would need to seek help for whatever had broken in her that allowed her to look at an aging woman and see only an obstacle to be managed. Craig would need to take full responsibility, not shift blame onto his wife, not hide behind his own financial desperation as an excuse for standing by while it happened. And both of them would need to understand that if I ever, for one single moment, believed my safety or Jacobs's well-being was at risk again, every piece of evidence I had would go straight to the detectives waiting down the street, and no amount of pleading would change my mind a second time. I told them the honey jar, the lab report, the footage, the transcripts, none of it was going away. It would sit in Harold Voss's office, ready for the rest of my life if necessary. I was not forgiving them that night. I was giving them exactly one chance to become people worth eventually being forgiven. Rachel left that night in tears. Real tears this time, I believe, though grief and fear can look remarkably similar on a person's face, and I have learned not to trust my own reading of either too quickly anymore. Craig stayed a moment longer, standing in my doorway, and he asked me, in a voice that sounded like the boy he used to be, why I hadn't just called the police. Why I was giving them a chance at all after everything. I told him the truth. I told him it was because of a whisper, Because a 10-year-old boy who loves his mother despite everything she has done had the courage to warn his grandmother not to drink the tea. And that same boy did not deserve to grow up knowing his parents went to prison the year he turned 11. I told Craig that Jacob was the only reason. There was a version of this story where anyone got a second chance at all, and that if he loved his son even half as much as I loved mine, he would spend every single day of the next however many years earning it. Craig left that night carrying something in his face I had never seen on him before. Not as a boy, not as a young man, not even at his own father's funeral. It was the look of a person seeing himself clearly for the first time in a very long while, and not liking what he saw. I stood on my porch and watched their car pull out of the driveway, taillights disappearing down Millbrook Lane, and I did not go back inside right away. I stood there in the cool night air for a long time, and across the street, Melissa's porch light clicked on, and she came out in her robe and crossed the street without a word and simply stood beside me, her arm through mine, the way she had stood beside me at Walter's funeral. And neither of us said anything at all. We did not need. Some moments are too large for words, and a good friend knows the difference between the moments that need talking through and the moments that just need someone standing quietly beside you in the dark. I did not sleep that night either, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness than the nights before. I lay awake replaying the look on Rachel's face, the sound of Craig's voice breaking on the word mom, and somewhere around 3 a.m, I got up, made myself a cup of tea from my new locked away, personally guarded honey jar. And I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote a letter I never intended to send to anyone. A letter to Walter, the way I sometimes still do when something happens that I do not know how to carry alone. I told him what our son had allowed to happen. I told him about the whisper that saved my life. I told him I did not know yet if I had done the right thing, giving Craig and Rachel one more chance instead of calling those detectives waiting down the street. I folded that letter and put it in the drawer with his wrench, and somehow doing that made the weight of the decision feel a little more bearable. The following morning, Jacob came downstairs, having slept through the entire confrontation upstairs in the guest room. None the wiser, and he asked me, rubbing sleep from his eyes, why Mommy and Daddy had left without saying goodbye to him the night before. I told him gently that the grown-ups had needed to have a serious talk, the kind that sometimes happens in families, and that everything was going to be all right. He looked at me for a long moment with those same serious eyes. He had used the night he whispered his warning, and he asked very quietly, "Is it about the honeyed?" I nearly wept right there at my own kitchen table. I told him, yes, sweetheart, it was about the honey, and that he had done exactly the right thing telling me, and that because of him, everyone in this family was going to have the chance to do better. He nodded slowly, this serious nod of a child carrying something heavier than a child should have to carry. And then he asked if we could still have pancakes, because even the bravest 10-year-old boy in the world still wants pancakes the morning after he helped save his grandmother's life. And I've never made a batch of pancakes with more love in my whole life than I did that Monday morning. The months that followed were not easy, and I will not stand here and tell you they were, because I think stories that pretend healing is simple do a disservice to everyone still living through the hard, ugly middle of it. Rachel did seek help eventually, real help. A therapist Harold recommended who specialized in exactly the kind of desperation, resentment, and moral collapse that leads a person to justify hurting someone they once loved. It took her months to say the word out loud in front of me. Poison, not supplement. Not mistake, not misunderstanding, poison. The day she finally said it, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, no longer able to meet my eyes, was the day I began to believe something might eventually be salvageable between us. Though I want to be honest with you, it has never gone back to what it was before. And some part of me does not think it should. I remember that particular afternoon clearly. Rachel had asked to come alone, without Craig, without Jacob, just the two of us. And she had sat across from me, twisting a paper napkin in her hands the entire time. The same nervous habit I had seen in 100 anxious parents over 31 years of teaching second grade. And I let her twist that napkin into shreds while she found the words. She told me about growing up with a mother who equated love with money, who had left her and her sisters. Nothing but debt and a lifetime of feeling like the ground could disappear beneath her at any moment. She told me about lying awake at night doing math in her head, the studio's expenses against its income, the loan payments against Craig's dealership commissions, filling the walls of their life, closing in a little more every single month. And somewhere in that fear, she said, she had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a number on a spreadsheet, a solution to a problem she was too ashamed to admit she could not solve any other way. I did not tell her it was all right. I want you to know that because I think it matters. I told her I understood fear. I understood desperation. I had lived through my own version of both after Walter died, and I did not know how I would pay for anything ever again. But I told her plainly, that fear does not excuse what she did. It only explains it. And there is a difference between the two that she was going to have to live with for the rest of her life. She nodded and she cried. Real tears, the kind that come from somewhere honest. And I believed her more in that moment than I had believed anything she said to me in the 12 years I had known her. Craig sold his portion of a small side investment he had kept secret from me. Something he had gambled on that had gone badly and started this spiral of debt that Rachel later admitted had pushed her toward the decisions she made. He took over more responsibility at home, more responsibility with Jacob, and slowly, painfully, he started coming to see me not as a source of solutions, but simply as his mother again. Someone to sit with, someone to talk to, honestly. Someone he had very nearly lost in every sense of the word. Even after that Sunday night, I did not simply set the folder aside and trust that everything would resolve itself. Harold insisted, and I agreed with him completely, that we formalize a kind of safety arrangement, something with teeth, something that did not rely purely on Craig and Rachel's good intentions going forward. 2 weeks after that dinner, I met with one of the detectives from the elder abuse unit, a calm, thorough woman named Detective Foster, at Harold's office, and together we drew up a written record of everything. The lab results, the footage, the financial documents, all of it formally logged and dated, not filed as an active criminal case, since I had chosen not to pursue charges, but placed on record as a documented history, so that if anything at all, never happened to me again, there would be no question, no doubt, no possibility of it being written off as the confused suspicion of an old woman. Detective Foster told me, before I left her office that day, that in her 15 years working elder abuse cases, she had met very few victims who handled the discovery with the clarity and composure I had, and that most families never got the chance at real accountability that I was choosing to give mine. I have thought about that comment many times since, wondering if I made the right choice, wondering if a harder woman would have simply let the law take its course. I do not know, even now, if I will ever be fully certain. I only know it was the choice that let me keep both my grandsons, family, and my own peace of mind. And most days, that feels like enough. Melissa was there for nearly every step of it, driving me to Harold's office when my hip acted up, sitting with me on nights when the anger came back, sharper than I expected and I needed. Someone who would not tell me to simply let it go. She never once told me I was doing the wrong thing by giving Craig and Rachel a second chance. And she never once told me I was doing the right thing either. She just kept saying the same quiet thing every time I doubted myself. It's your life, Barbara. You get to decide what mercy costs, and you get to decide who's earned the right to receive it. I have thought about that sentence more than almost anything else anyone said to me that entire year. I changed my will. I want to be honest about that too, because I think you deserve the full truth of this story and not a soft, tidy ending. I did not disinherit Craig entirely, because he is still my son and Jacob is still my grandson, and I could not bring myself to punish that boy for his parents' choices. But I restructured everything with Harold's help, placed the bulk of what Walter and I built into a trust that Jacob will receive directly when he comes of age, protected from ever being touched, mismanaged, or manipulated by anyone else, including his own parents. I made it clear in writing, witnessed and notarized exactly why I made that choice, so that no one ever again could pretend confusion was the reason behind any decision I made about my own life. Jacob still stays with me 2, sometimes 3 nights a week. He is 11 now. He does not fully understand everything that happened that spring, and I have chosen carefully, with Harold's guidance and our counselor's advice, to protect him from the full weight of it until he's old, enough to carry it without it crushing. Something soft in him that does not deserve to be crushed. But he knows this much. He knows that the night he whispered those 4 words to me, he did something braver than most adults ever managed to do in their entire lives. He stood between the person he loved and a danger he barely understood. And he chose truth over comfort, even though it terrified him every single night since that spring when Jacob stays over. I make my chamomile tea in front of him, slowly, deliberately, using honey from a jar I keep locked away and refill myself. And I let him watch me pour it, stir it, and drink it all the way down. It is a small ritual, one that probably means nothing to anyone else. But to the 2 of us, it means everything. It means every single time I'm still here. It means every single time he saved me. There was a moment about 8 months after that spring. That, I think, tells you more about where this story eventually landed than anything I could explain in words. Craig came to my house alone on a weekday evening, unannounced, which he almost never does. And he sat with me in the kitchen for a long while without saying much of anything. And then he asked if he could see the honey jar, the one I still keep locked away, the one that started all of it. I brought it out, still sealed in its plastic bag exactly as I had left it that very first night. And he held it in his hands and looked at it for a long time. And then he started to cry, not the quiet, controlled crying of a man trying to hold himself together, but the full, shaking kind I had not seen from him since he was a little boy. He told me he thought about that jar every single day. He told me he did not know if he would ever forgive himself for standing in this kitchen and agreeing, even quietly, even just once, that his own mother's life was something that could be managed and arranged for someone else's convenience. I held my son while he cried in my kitchen, the same kitchen where all of this began. And I did not tell him it was all right, because it was not all right. And I have learned at 73 years old that there is no real comfort in false comfort. But I told him that the man crying in front of me, the man who could not forgive himself, was proof that the version of him from that terrible spring was not the only version that existed. And that as long as that remained true, there was still something in him worth rebuilding, still something worth the years of quiet, patient work it would take to earn back what he had so nearly thrown away. Rachel and I have a different relationship now than we had before. Quieter, more careful on both sides, built less on easy affection and more on the slow, deliberate accumulation of trustworthy behavior over time. She no longer calls me mom quite as easily as she once did, and I think honestly that is appropriate. Some words have to be earned back one small, honest year at a time. She still comes to Sunday dinners. She still helps Jacob with his homework when he stays at their house. But she also, every few months, without my ever asking, sends me a message letting me know exactly what is happening with their finances. Transparent in a way she never was before, as though she understands finally. That secrecy was the soil the entire poison grew from in the first place, and that the only way to prove she has changed is to make certain there is nothing left hidden between us anymore. I think about that whisper almost every day of my life now. Grandma, don't drink that. 4 words from a 10-year-old boy that pulled back a curtain. I might never have looked behind on my own. Not because I was foolish, but because trust, real trust, the kind you build over years with people you love, is not designed to expect betrayal. It is designed to open doors. And that is exactly why the people who wish to hurt us the most are so rarely strangers. They are the ones already standing inside, already holding a key we gave them ourselves. I am not going to tell you to trust no one, because that is not a life worth living. And it is certainly not the life I want for the years I have left. But I will tell you this, from an old woman who nearly paid with her own body for loving too easily and questioning too little. Pay attention. Watch for the small things that do not add up. Trust the instinct in your own chest, even when your mind tries to talk you out of it. And if you have children in your life, even young ones, listen to them. Really listen when they whisper something that frightens you, because sometimes the smallest, quietest voice in the room is the only one brave enough to tell you the truth. Some evenings sitting alone after Jacob has gone up to bed, I think about how close I came to never knowing any of this at all. How easily that Tuesday could have gone the way every ordinary Tuesday before it had gone. Tea poured, honey stirred, mug lifted and swallowed without a second thought. One more quiet dose in a slow accumulation that Arthur Bell told me later could well have ended with a hospital visit that no doctor would have. Connected back to a jar of honey, sitting innocently on an old woman's counter. I do not spend much time dwelling on what might have happened, because I have found that dwelling too long in that particular darkness serves no one, least of all me. But I allow myself sometimes, in the quiet hours, to simply be grateful in the deepest, most complete way a person can be grateful for one small boy's courage. I chose to forgive in the end, not because Craig and Rachel earned it easily or quickly, and not because I am some saintly grandmother without anger left in her heart. I still have anger. I imagine I always will. Tucked away somewhere behind my ribs, right beside the grief. I chose to forgive because I watched, over many long, difficult months, 2 people do the hard, humiliating, unglamorous work of actually becoming different than they were the night I said that. Folder down on my coffee table. Forgiveness, I have learned at 73 years old, is not something you hand out because someone asks nicely or cries convincingly. It is something you build slowly, brick by brick, alongside someone who is willing to build it with you. And you never, ever hand over the only key to your own safety again while you're doing it. Melissa still crosses the street some evenings, still sits with me on the porch the way she always has for 22 years now. And every so often, without either of us needing to say why, she reaches over and squeezes my hand. And I understand exactly what she means by it. We survived something together that spring, the 2 of us. In the quiet way old friends survive things without fanfare, without anyone else ever fully understanding the weight of it. And I do not know what I would have done without her standing beside me through every part of it. Walter's wrench is still in that drawer by the door. My honey jar is still locked in a box in my closet. refilled by my own hand every single time. And my grandson still whispers to me sometimes, not out of fear anymore, just out of habit, just to say goodnight, Grandma. And every single time I hear his voice, quiet and small and impossibly brave, I think about the night 4 whispered words saved my life. And I am more grateful than I have words to properly give you, more grateful than any thank you I could ever say to him directly. 'Cause how do you thank a child for saving your life without frightening him with the full size of what he actually did? If this story moved something in you tonight, if it made you think of your own grandmother, your own mother, someone in your life who deserves to be protected and listened to and believed, I am asking you now, one more time, from the bottom of my heart, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city below right now. I want to see how far this story traveled tonight. Because every single time I read those comments, city after city, name after name, it reminds me that none of us are as alone in this as we sometimes feel late at night in our own kitchens. And if you love your grandmother, if she's still here with you or if she's watching over you from somewhere you cannot see anymore, do these 3 things for me before you close this video. Like it, so this story reaches the person who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story I have to tell you, because I promise you I have more than one. And share it with a friend, with your family, with anyone who has an aging parent or grandparent they love. Because you never know whose life a story like this one might quietly, gently save. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one. Please take care of the people in your life who whispered the truth to you, even when it's frightening to hear it. Sometimes those small, quiet voices are the very ones keeping you alive. Before you go, I want to say one more thing, because I think it matters more than the story itself in some ways. If you are sitting there tonight recognizing even a small piece of yourself in this, a strange feeling about a loved one's kindness, a suspicion you have talked yourself out of a dozen times, a child who whispered something, brushed aside, please do not wait 5 weeks the way I very nearly did before. I finally listened to my own instincts. Talk to someone you trust. Write things down. Keep a record. Quietly, carefully, the way I learned to. You do not owe anyone the benefit of the doubt at the cost of your own safety. No matter how much you love them, no matter how many years you have shared a kitchen table together. I am 73 years old, and I promise you, it is never too late to protect yourself. And it is never foolish, never weak, never a sign of a failing mind to trust the small, quiet voice telling you something is wrong. Even when it comes from someone as small and as brave as my grandson standing beside me that Tuesday night, tugging my sleeve, whispering 4 small, simple words that changed absolutely everything about the rest of my life.